Welcome to Law Matters. I'm Jennifer Varsley. I'm a lawyer, and in this show we look at the legal aspects of current affairs. Today we're exploring immigration and Brexit. I've come to Trinity College, Cambridge to ask Professor Catherine Barnard, an expert in EU law, why immigration has been such a big issue, both pre and post the Brexit vote.
Immigration's always been such a difficult topic in the UK, and this predates Brexit and the Brexit discussions. I think in the run-up to the EU referendum, the reality had dawned on a lot of people that since 2004, when the EU expanded, there had been really quite significant numbers of EU migrants coming to the UK. And that's because we have an open labour market, we were in some parts of the country nearly at full employment, and so there were jobs for people to do, and there's not a lot of bureaucracy for people to comply with when they come here. So they were coming, and they were doing a lot of jobs, both in catering, hospitality, but also working in the fields, but at the other end of the spectrum, very high level jobs too in the NHS. In some parts of the country, people thought, yeah, it's fine, we're used to immigration, so cosmopolitan parts of London, other cities. But in those parts of the country which have not seen much immigration, suddenly the face of their town was changing. And if it is an area, part of the country where people already find it hard to get jobs, and also it coincides with cuts in government funding for public services, it's quite easy to say, well, look at all these immigrants, they're coming here and taking our jobs. And so it became a very polarised issue, and that's reflected too in the way that the Brexit vote went. So as a rule of thumb, cities voted to remain, rural areas voted to leave, and it was in the rural areas where immigration became a really quite potent issue. And actually, if you look at Lord Ashcroft's polling just after the referendum, what you see is the reason why people voted to leave, the first reason was to take back control, allegedly parliamentary control, but in fact it was about control of borders as well. And then secondly, they gave immigration as the reason. So immigration was very much at the forefront of the debate. And it's a sensitive issue.
Around 3.3 million people who live in the UK are citizens of another EU country, which equates to around 5% of the current UK population. This is Queen's College, Cambridge. Dr. Chris Bickerton teaches politics here. He literally wrote the book on what it means to belong in the EU, the European Union, A Citizen's Guide. I want to ask him why the UK seems more concerned with immigration than some of our European neighbours.
So in the UK's case, the UK has a very open labour market, which means that people can come and get jobs much more easily than some other labour markets in European Union countries where there are more restrictions. So that means that with an open labour market and a reasonably well-performing economy, there's a lot of demand for jobs in the UK that's then taken up by European Union citizens. I think the fact that the UK is obviously an English-speaking country, which means that that's easier to come and work and also more attractive for people because they can pick up language skills. There's a whole series of factors that mean that if you compare all the different countries that are members of the single market, the UK has a pretty high number of EU migrants compared to other countries. There are some countries that are net exporters of labour, and the UK is very much a net importer of labour.
Dr. Graham Gudgeon is a researcher at the University of Cambridge and is the Chief Economic Advisor to Policy Exchange, a leading UK think tank. He is currently involved in developing forecasts on the impact of Brexit. Why do you think it's the case that so many people are dissatisfied with the current immigration laws?
First thing to say is it was the big issue in the referendum. And it was an issue, I think, that much of the media and what people refer to as the liberal elite had tried to keep out of the national political discourse. So this was a great chance, I think, for most people who really don't consider themselves part of the liberal elite to say, right, look, here's an issue I'm concerned about. I'm going to vote for it. And really, that's what drove the Brexit referendum result. Why are they concerned about it? Again, I think the media tend to get this wrong. To me, it's a matter of ownership. Who owns this country? It's not a question that's ever really asked, but it is a concept in the minds of a lot of ordinary people. They grow up feeling they're British, they're lucky, in the lottery in life they've drawn a good ticket, they're British, and they feel they own the country in some sense, and therefore they ought to control who comes into it, just in the same way as you control who comes into your house. But one of the ways in which the media get this wrong, I think they're trying to seek what they think as more rational reasons why people should be concerned about migration. Is it really about pressure on their national health or pressure on schools? If school classes, if a majority of the children in a class are from abroad or whatever. And that's clearly wrong, or at least only part of the answer, because some of the biggest areas where there's a big opposition to migrants are areas where there aren't many migrants. And that's always befuddled or flummoxed a lot of commentators. Say, well, why do people object to migrants? There aren't any here. But if you see it in this way, if you see it as a matter of ownership, these people, wherever they live, whether there are migrants, say, look, there seem to be an awful lot of people coming into this country from abroad. Perhaps we'll get to the point where they're a majority. I mean, that will happen within the lifetime of many people in the US, for instance, that people who weren't traditional Americans, mainly from Latin America, will become a majority. But even when they become a large minority, they can start to influence political decisions, and perhaps political decisions on migration, for instance. And things go beyond the control of people who thought that this was their country. So I think that's the key reason why they object.
Ultimately, this is about people and not numbers, as this affects the lives of many that have lived here for a very long time and now call the UK home. So you have quite a unique experience, I think, in that you've been both a refugee and an immigrant to the UK. So perhaps can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up in Australia before coming to the UK?
Yeah, of course. So that's a very interesting story. My parents are from Vietnam, and obviously the Vietnam War caused a lot of upheaval and turmoil, and at the end of it, after the Americans had left in '77, there was a lot of uncertainty for both my parents, and the question about democracy had obviously been resolved in terms of there will be none, the Communist Party had taken over. And there's a big question about, well, what's the next step, and what do we want for our family? And so the reality of it was that my mum and dad both made the effort and point that they would rather go out and fight for freedom and perish in the process of doing so than to stay incarcerated and die incarcerated. So they went off and as many Vietnamese would have done back then, raised enough money to buy a boat. My family and a whole host of other families got onto this boat and just went out on the hope that we'd find safety. And from the story goes that for about a week we were drifting away, ran out of food, ran out of water, ran out of petrol, and it was really looking quite dire. And a German merchant boat had arrived and found us by chance in this deep ocean, and realised the situation we're in, realised the circumstance, and towed us to Malaysia, where we were then put into a refugee camp, and obviously then the whole asylum seeking process kicked in, and we were then given refuge in Australia, and that was late 70s, so I would have been only 6 months, but that was the beginning of what would be my freedom, and certainly I think for my family, I think for my parents anyway, that's their greatest achievement, and they talk about that all the time, and it's really important for myself to remember the humble beginnings and the kind of luck and fortune that befell us when we were in that ocean, and the circumstance of the life that's been given to me, to make something of it, and the drive to give back as well, and kind of how it framed the way I see the world and the way I see people completely now.
And the start of an incredible journey for you.
Yeah, certainly, starting in Australia and moving on.
And you mentioned that you felt like you're a global citizen here. Can you talk a little bit more about that concept?
Yeah, so I think for me the concept of global citizen really is someone who is kind of open to all cultures around the world, and it's not just about travelling, and you could be a global citizen without having to actually leave your country. It's about having a curiosity of people from different places, curiosity for their cultural heritage, curiosity for their food, and I think that's the notion of what being a global citizen is for me. And it's about embracing, what others might call the other, and I just see it's just our family, really, and that's what being a global citizen is to recognise that we are all part of this kind of common community that is much greater and more widespread than we can imagine. And that's why sometimes it's hard to understand how can someone from the States, how can someone from the Middle East be part of this family network, because it's so distant, so far and so different. But that's the very reason why I think if you're a global citizen, you appreciate that difference and you appreciate that distance, and you reach out to it, to close the gap, really.